Thank you.
Right. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, it's great to connect with Krupesh. He is a CDMP associate. He's been involved in the data world for many years. Delivered some amazing projects both in New Zealand and now Australia. The topic of this book is really interesting for me because it's an area that I have been involved in. I have been involved in some failures and some successes. But yeah, let me not waffle on and let's dive straight in. But as Debbie said, if anybody has got a question, just put your hand up and um, I will direct the question or let you ask the question. And I see Michael has just joined us as well. Michael, welcome. But yeah, without any further ado, I'm going to pass control to Krupesh and over to you.
Thank you, Drew. So first of all, I want to thank you, Dama Southern Africa, for organizing this book launch and giving me opportunity to present my book in front of this wider and vibrating community. So let's get started. I'm glad to inform that my first book on data migration recently got released on 23rd of April by Technics Publication, and it is now available everywhere on Amazon. I started preparing a course based on this book recently, and it's taking me around 15 to 20 minutes for each chapter. So it's obvious that I cannot explain the whole book in this webinar. But when I was preparing this presentation, I tried to compile and bundle all the key highlights of this book. So let me first begin with introducing myself. It's not been many years. The Rubin kind has just been a decade and a half. I've been solving data problems, and I've technically worked in almost most of the data problems. I started as software engineers creating data replication and disaster recovery solutions. Then I got into data migration in 2014, 11 years from here. In the past, as a data migration lead, and the success of that project gave me more work as a data migration consultant. My last gig in New Zealand was as an integration manager, and this is all in the public sector. And that's when I was integration manager. I was looking into migration and integration both. And from last 1.5 years, I'm data governance specialist here in Melbourne. And in 2014, I'm part of that 11,800 people. I become CDMP associate. And it has actually helped me to write the book as well, becoming CDMP. Coming back to the book, the key takeaway of the book is data migration is a business problem and it should be solved like a one. There should be a strategic solution for it. Who will benefit from this book? Those whose reputation is on the line, they will benefit. So ETL developers and technical people, obviously this book will help them, but primarily this book is for projects, program managers, technical leaders who are directly or indirectly involved in business system change, who understand that they are dealing with a complex data migration problem, and especially those who are retiring legacy systems running from multiple decades. This book will definitely help you. Now, I'm a firm believer of start with the why. So what is my why to see data migration as a business problem is, in my experience, so far I realized that data migration on its own is not feasible. There is always a larger change in the business that actually requires data migration. And that change can be glorified digital transformation or business mergers, a business acquire another business. And most of the times, the system, the business application itself has completely deteriorated. And it becomes a technical or tech depth that negates the capacity of a business to innovate or improvise. So these are some of the, or most of the reasons that requires retiring a system, and then therefore it requires the data to be migrated into some other system. So therefore I see it as a larger problem. It's just not a technical problem from moving point A to point B. You are actually transforming a lot of knowledge and meaning from one structure to another structure. So that's my why. Now, the genesis of this book is this three questions. Um, it was 2022, after my third successful project. I was trying to, and I was a been an independent consultant, a contractor. So I was trying to market myself and write a white paper. And I was also trying to meet multiple prospects and trying to understand how to get a next data migration project. And in that process, I got to meet a senior executive, and he was contemplating about how to retire a critical legacy system in a council, in a municipal council. And it was an asset management system running from 25, 22 years or 25 years. Now, I went into that discussion as a technical person, and I walked back as a business person. That three questions that he had about how he can be proactive about this whole change. There was the the ground was not even ready. There was no target system. He just had a task that he has 3 years to retire the system, and where to start, how to be proactive about this, how to actually comprehend this problem. Is there any framework to understand this problem? So this question stayed with me, and I kept researching about it, and it gave me idea to write a white paper. And it was 2024, I think mid 2024, I realized that I'm actually sitting on 30,000 words here, and I should actually compile a book rather than a white paper. So that's how this whole journey started. It took me 3 years to research, write, and then finally this book happened. Now, coming back to the problem of data migration here, why it matters. It it impacts the business continuity. Now, if you get it wrong, it impacts the business continuity, and it also impacts your customer experience, which eventually impacts the brand. So therefore, it matters. You need to get it right. Let us look at one particular case study here, which is also part of my book. And please pardon me, I need to have some water. So here is the case study. When data migration goes south, it can be really catastrophic. This case study I came across in my research, where just look at those numbers, 318 million pounds spent on the migration. It happens because a larger bank acquires another bank, and they have to migrate 5 million customers. So they spend a lot of money to do it right, or sorry, to do the data migration right. It doesn't happen well. They spend again 247 million pound. They end up paying 48 million pound in fines. 81,000 pound the CIO himself has to pay. 1.9 million customers got affected. The credit card, debit cards, and ATM, online banking stopped working. Some bad actors take advantage of that situation. Dubious transactions were conducted, and 1,300 people lost their money, including life savings. So, and this is all public information. So what I realize over here is that data migration is this unloved child of digital transformation. And when that unloved child goes rogue, the consequences are really troublesome. I also refer to some of the surveys that I've come across in my research. This is from 2017. Data Migration Pro founder Dylan Jones, he conducted a research, reach out to a bunch of people who are involved in data migration, who are basically project managers. And he found that only 36% projects are done within the forecasted budget, and only 46% were completed within the right time frame, within the right deadline. Then I also came across, so what I'm trying to say here is that this problem is not straightforward, not simpler. It's not easy as to get it done. Second survey I have in my book is from a company, Bridgehead, who provide healthcare data management solution. And this is more recent. It is 2022 when they conducted a survey across United States, reach out to CIOs. They found that more than 50% of the CIOs are responsible for more than 5 legacy systems. They dig deeper and they found that there are some key factors behind sustaining legacy systems. The first one was obvious, that the difficulty in identifying a right alternative. But the second one was data migration. Even if you identify a target system, how to take all this legacy data into the new system was quite challenging. In fact, that was the second most factor. So it makes me wonder what makes data migration so unique. I'm trying to, when I was researching, I tried to figure out this, and I could only think of this 3 or 4 reasons that really makes it unique. First is, and this is what I felt when I was doing my first migration, unknown source and moving target. When you're doing retiring this legacy system, you don't have much information. The data dictionary is not reliable. You might have the vendor or no. Who knows if the system is more than 2 decades, there's a limited support from the vendor. So the system is unknown. And on the other hand, in the large organization, you don't just buy application and run it. You customize it, you make changes. So the target system is also changing every fortnight or every month whenever there's a new development cycle happens. So therefore, it's an unknown source and moving target in terms of the technical challenge. Apart from that, the problem itself doesn't happen every year. You don't replace multi-million-dollar system every year. Sorry, it happens, once a decade or two. So the problem is temporary but unavoidable, and it happens once in a while. Now, because of that, because it's once in a decade problem, you get it wrong, and there's a risk for long-term inefficiencies. Removing tech debt further creates further tech debts, and your data, your data management, or the reliability of the data assets, you're always busy in fixing those past issues.
Krupesh, there is a question that has come up from Melissa. She wants to know, do you adjust the new source for the data that is in your legacy system, and does the business decide what data to migrate?
Sorry, can you come back with what exactly the meaning of changing the source?
So obviously you've got a target, and then do you have to adjust that target to cater for the legacy data that you've got? Kind of how do you map from your legacy data to your new source?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for clarification. In my experience, it's other way around. The target system dictates, because that's the future. There's a new business processes coming in, new improvements coming in, and that requires data in certain structures. So that's your target. That's where you are going to move to. However, there could be situations where certain information is part of the legacy system, which is not in the target system. It can also happen. In that case, certain data elements or certain processes, which is unique to your business, not in the target system, can lead to the situation where you have to change the target structure to cater for those unique instances. But overall, as a project, the whole project is actually moving data from the legacy to the target. So therefore, the target is your end goal. and it dictates the whole data migration process.
Krupesh, very often in an agile world where the system that is going in is being put in an agile fashion, and as a result, the data model, the target data model gets developed in an agile fashion as well. How do you ensure that, call it the foundation blocks, the fundamental building blocks are put into that model first so that you can start planning out to do that migration?
Yes. So there are two factors here. Data migration in its own, it's not going to dictate that. You have the business process, business analyst, and other players in this larger change who would be working on this improvising of the processes and finalizing the process as well. And you have to map the processes as well before you come to the data migration. But on my very first point here, when I say that why it's unique, I'm trying to explain here that why the data migration is unique is because exactly of this problem that you have unknown source and you have a moving target. And as I go in this presentation and as a part of the book as well, I have actually explained how to handle this situation where you have this agile environment, the target system is changing, and how you can keep track of your work and make sure that the foundational work has been done and you can actually measure it. So in this presentation, I have a slide on that as well. But here, what I'm trying to explain is what's so unique about data migration. Like why it's so complex, why it's bound for mistakes. That's what I'm trying to explain briefly here. And then I'm going to jump into the solution. And that's what the book is about, the framework on how to solve it. May I proceed?
Yeah, please do. There was one final point from Melissa saying, so if your target system is getting customized, you're increasing technical debt. So you might have to change that data from the legacy system as well. But I think let's listen to your solution and reducing that technical debt, and we'll get there.
Yeah. The very next slide is about actually the solution. So these are the as I said, the characteristics of what makes data migration so unique. And last point, as I said, is data migration is happening because of a larger business change, and therefore it demands decisions and ownership. There are many players when you do data migration. There are many stakeholders. A legacy system would be touching different business units in your organization, and people would have, and that's a very common. People have invented their own ways of doing things, and especially when the legacy system you cannot change it, people invent their own ways, and it all becomes sort of surfaces suddenly when you're trying to do data migration. You have to stop those bad habits, and you really need to have ownership from the business on getting those how can I say, those ad hoc processes controlled, and then not spilling the data quality, bad data quality all across your data landscape before you do a migration. So it needs wide ownership from the stakeholders. It's not just two developers doing things and trying to fix things on the fly, but somebody in the business has to say, okay, this thing going to stop here, and we're going to before we migrate, we're going to reach to a clean state in the legacy system as well. So these are some of the reasons why it's a very complex problem. You deal with not just technology, but a complex web of people and politics. Now, how exactly you can solve this? I hope that the framework I'm going to now present will help many, but this is my genuine attempt to put forward a solution for this. The solution is this simple framework. Now remember that those three questions that I had, and this whole effort was about how I can help someone who has those three questions. And this framework is that outcome of my last 3 years of research. And also, I also managed to get some successful data migrations. So I also piggybacked from my experience, did some research, and eventually created this particular framework. It's obvious here that this framework has three stages. foundation, iteration, and migration. Now, before you do data migration, the foundation stage here is your project discovery stage. So the three components or three parallel components in the foundation stage, before even you write a single piece of code, this book recommends that you work on these three foundational components. Once you get the foundational right, then you actually move to the nuances of moving data from point A to point B. And that's the iterative part of the data migration. And then once you get that right, there's no issue after many iterations or several iterations. Then you have the last part, which is the migration part, which has these three components. There are 12 chapters in the book. And as you can see, there are 10 components here. So the first chapter is introduction, the last is the conclusion. But that's those 10 chapters in the middle takes a real deep dive on each component. So this is where I've tried to explain different scenarios and all those questions that actually coming right now here as well. You will find that those questions are addressed in the book when I'm taking a deep dive into each component. So now beyond this framework, as I said, there are 10 components. I cannot talk for 3-4 hours on each component here, but I want to really bring forward some highlights of the book apart from this framework. So in this book, I'm also proposing the data migration plan as the key document. So if the framework gives you idea on how to migrate, your plan is your key artifact that drives the project forward. In the book, you will see that in every component, I'm referring back to the data migration plan, that how you can leverage your data migration plan beyond just a courtesy document and actually make it your your key communication channel through which you provide wider visibility, and you also log all the information and decisions taken to conduct the data migration. So for example, I recommend in the book that you should not write any piece of code for migration before you have the three foundational components done, and it's reflected in your first version of the data migration plan, which is then endorsed by the stakeholders and sign off. So then you can move to the next iterative stage, which is then agile, and you do changes in your code with every sprint. But before you start doing that, you must have your first version of the plan ready. And I also see the plan, data migration plan or whatever plan, is just like making a plan for your holiday. You want to ensure that you have good experience, and it's a conscious avoidance of unpleasant surprises. So I really highlight the significance of the plan in the book, and every chapter it refers back to the plan, that how you can reflect your findings in this component for your project through the plan to the wider stakeholders. Beyond plan, the framework also highlight the compliances and regulations. Sorry,
Krupesh, just before you carry on, in that bottom level of your diagram, you had data segments. What are you addressing there? How do you go about it? And then there's a question about the buy-in from the business that is critical, but often you get people and the politics who are resisting the change because they're protecting their jobs, they're protecting the legacy. How do you handle those people? How do you get them to come along your side on board as well?
Yes. So it's a change management problem, and in the people and technology component here, the third in the corner, that's where it talks about how you can deal with this problem. Your data, coming back to your first question, data segments. Data segments talk about the logical partition of your legacy data. So master data and transactional data, and what should be the logical order of migration. And it also addresses, once you can see data in those segments, you also need to work on what kind of regulations and compliances are applied on this data that I must adhere to while I'm doing the data migration. And that's what the slide that I was just about to go after the data migration plan. The next one was this compliance. So in the very first two components, the data migration scope and the data segment, this framework or the solution that I'm proposing ensure that the data migration will be compliant. And it also proposes a way on how you can reflect this in your data migration plan, that you have this kind of data on which there are certain regulations apply. You have internal policies as well for your master data for your customers or your patients, and how you're going to actually adhere to those policies and compliance through the data migration. You're going to either put some controls in your ETL, or you're going to have contractual obligations with the vendor. So in that discovery work, when uh, you read the book, you realize that the first three foundational components, this is where the real discovery work and all these questions will surface, and you have to answer that. And this is where you do this work before even you select the target system. So it's not that you have to wait until you have a vendor or you're waiting for the vendor. You can actually start preparations and be proactive by utilizing this framework and just start working on this first three components. And so the second highlight is this uh, compliant aware and taking the data compliance seriously while doing the migration. And now I want to answer that people and technology one. In that particular component, I have this data management maturity assessment, a simplified one. So obviously that chapter talks about what are the different roles you need to involve. It addresses the situation where you will encounter people who have just been working on the legacy system from last 2 decades. I have myself witnessed this scenario where I have worked with people who are there working from 15 years, 20 years just on that one system. And yes, I would not say that I have encountered that situation, but yes, it happens that not everybody is happy with the change. There would be certain people in the organization who doesn't want that change, who want the legacy system to continue until they retire, right? So there are many situations like that. But in that particular chapter, I'm advocating a, a solution that if you are unaware about this particular organization that you're going to do migration for, conduct a maturity assessment. And there are two approaches I have proposed: technology-led and business-led. So technology-led is where you can rely on your in-house data management team, or you can hire a specialist who work with your technical team. And because you have a good maturity of data governance and data management, you can rely on your technical people to lead the data migration. On the other hand, if you are not well versed and you're not on the higher rank of the data governance, then it should be a business-led project where the business leaders actually be responsible for this. And there are two, it's a different way of doing data migration. So people and technology component indeed take a deep dive on these situations and try to propose a solution for that as well. May I move? Proceed? Drew?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Yeah. Now again, coming back to the question of that agile changes, the target system is changing. How you making sure that we are doing the right thing? So in my very first project, I kind of figure out this tactic where I used to keep track for literally every target structure that I have and every field within that structure I have. I used to keep track of these 4 flags, whether it's mapped, whether I have business rule, whether there's any data quality constraint I need to put on that, and it's finally loaded in the target system, and it's end-to-end completion, which means that it's loaded and also I can see in the target system that it's working fine. So there are these 4 flags I used to maintain. Now, not these flags are not applicable across all the fields. There would be some straightforward field, let's say first name, where you don't have any business rule. You're literally just taking the value and putting across. So where the flag is not applicable, you set it to 1. And that way, I could actually derive how much work is done for one data structure. And from there, eventually comes this dashboard where I used to present the current status quo every fortnight to the steering committee. That this is where we are, this is how much work is done, and then I can easily highlight all the zeros and tell that why we are still at 99.99. What are those two fields where I'm waiting from ages for the business rule or a mapping to be finalized and signed off? So I have taken this approach, and I've used this approach in my projects, but I used to put this in front of the steering committee every 15 days, and I can trace back that how long I've been waiting for certain validation. As a technical person, you can put some temporary workarounds to move the data forward, but it has to be well communicated. For example, uh, in one of the project I have done in hospital, the bed and ward code was created on will, basically. Whereas on the new system, it was an hierarchy structure of all the public hospitals in a district. Now, for me as a data migration guy, I can create some temporary workaround and say unknown or some code and migrate the data. But getting that hierarchy structure approved and getting that final copy loaded in the target system so I can do my real mapping, and that mapping must be validated by some medical staff or sorry, hospital administrative staff. These things take me almost a year. So, sometimes the problem is not technical, but it's more of a getting approvals from the business. And this is the way I used to keep my mind sane and keep track of like those hundreds of fields across many data structures. So, and I've explained this in the book as well. After that, there's a component on data migration testing strategy. So the book then, in that particular component, proposes this 3 type of testing for data migration: data unit testing, data integrity testing, and the functional testing. So unit testing is basically where you compare unit. Here is a one data structure. For example, let's say patient or a customer. So number of records extracted, compare it to number of records loaded. You must be doing some data cleansing or reconciliation from multiple legacy systems. So how are you going to compare and how are you going to keep track of all this data cleansing steps that have reduced the number of records eventually making into the target system? So 100 record extracted and only 80 loaded. Why? Where is the 20 records? So all of those minor and unit level, not minor, but unit level testing are part of the first type of testing, or testing at the individual data structure level. Second one is the data integrity testing. So this is where you cannot migrate orders because customers are not yet loaded. So we have this referential integrities, and the book goes very deep into how you can ensure that your data, the final staging data, is highly integrated. It is not going to violate anything in the new system, and it's not going to break your business processes. And the last one is the real labor work, where you actually have to open the target system and manually test the migrate data, and how many you're going to do. So I think many people have used this, but I've put some effort to find a formula and do some research and propose this sampling way that you can use the statistical sampling that normally people use on election surveys and pick up the right number of records that you must test to ensure that your data is migrated correctly and you have compared them on screen by screen. So this 3 type of testing is also a key part of the book and a key highlight. And one of the major thing is, after every component in this book, literally every chapter, every chapter ends with a set of questions, and that questions you have to ask from the information that you have just read in that chapter for your own project. So for example, the second chapter, data migration scope, ends with this uh, set of questions. Take a moment to have a quick look. But my point here is, whatever project you are doing right now, what you are supposed to do in near future, this book will provide you a list of questions that you can follow up and find answers, make a plan based on that, and do your data migration successfully. If you just take the first three components and list all the questions and you find all the answers, I believe you have literally done the project discovery work. So that is the action item for my reader. And at the end, as a concluding chapter, I've tried to explain in a way that because it's once in a decade or a two exercise, this kind of projects are into millions. I've seen like it goes into 50, 100 millions, in 100 million plus. When you're investing this giant amount, you have this golden opportunity to also consider that is this the right time to do things right and improve your data management maturity and governance maturity. So what I've tried to convey in the last chapter is that if you have data governance, data migration would be a smooth run because you are mature to do it quite well. But at the same time, while doing the data migration, the project will expose the gaps and lack of data governance. So from there, you can actually create a business case while as a part of the, not part of the data migration, but as a part of the finding of the data migration, you can prepare a business case towards implementing certain robust processes and controls to improve your overall data governance maturity. And I also try to, as you can see in this diagram, really try to simplify what is data governance, what is data-driven culture, what is data as an asset jargon. So last chapter is all about simplifying this different jargons that we use in our data industry, and also preach in a way that when you're doing data migration, it can be a value-added exercise. And the last chapter is really for the leaders. So if you are a project manager, just want to do the migration, the first 11 chapter is good enough for you. But if you are a leader who can see the larger picture and influence the larger picture, the last chapter is definitely for you. And I was also very fortunate that after the declaration of this webinar, people have reached out and I got my first review of this book, which I want to share. And I assume the reviewer of the book is also attending this webinar. So I would like to say thank you personally. But I was really grateful when I saw this because after 3 years of research and trying to put this forward, I was really nervous when I submitted my manuscript. When people see your work, it sort of butterflies in your stomach, right? So when I first got this review, I actually got relaxed that okay, whatever is in this book is making sense. So this is my first book, and I really will appreciate if you can, share your feedback with me and then share it with the world. So I would like to conclude here, and I hope that that I've influenced you enough that that it has triggered this emotion in your brain. And I would now like to open the floor for all the questions and answers.
Thanks very much, Krupesh. Great insights. There are a couple of questions, first and foremost around the testing, and then there's some broader questions. So one of the questions is, should the functional testing be done by the subject matter experts of the organization? And then the other question was, don't you need to make sure that you've migrated all of your data before you start doing your functional testing, not just a sample population?
Great. Yes. So both of this thing is addressed in the book, but I would like to highlight that. yes, SME must be involved, but SME cannot do a complete test, right? It depends how many SMEs you have, first of all. And in my experience, I've seen that you would have one or two of them. So you cannot ask one or two SMEs to compare 10,000 patient information on both the screens. So in my experience, I have utilized super users and the trainers who are going to train people on the new system. They can be, and they again, there's also the compliance side, who is authorized to see personal information. Those kind of things also matter. So you need to um, think of the right people beyond SMEs. SMEs can guide it through. SMEs can handle some really complex cases that they know from their experience that there has been some particular customers or patient who had really exceptional episode in your system, so they can deal with that. But in terms of running the whole testing project, let's say you are migrating with this formula, you are migrating 10,000 patient, then you have to compare 384 of them as per this particular slide. And in the book, I provide that when you're migrating into millions, how you can manage that number can be manageable. You don't have to compare million patient or million customers. But think about those people who are going to train people. Think about those people who are leading the data entry teams, right? And who are authorized in your business to actually see personal information and actually can legally, compare both the screen. So yeah, it's a team effort.
Okay, Tariq, I see your hands up. I'll get to you in a second. Brenna's put a link in the chat of some work that he did a few years ago, 5 data migration chats, data migration mistakes that you could make. So have a look at that as well. Then there's a really nice question from Lisa. She says, after spending 3 years building this framework and guiding others through it, what is one insight that completely changed the way you understand data migration as a business transformation? And what is the one area that needs to stay evergreen with this framework of functional components, no matter how tools and systems evolve?
Yeah. Great question. I've understood the first part of it, but let me answer that bit. Um, as you have seen my experience, I was a technical person who ended up doing some migration. And as I said that when I was trying to find more work, more projects for myself, I actually realized the dilemma of how, what project or program manager is seeking out of this, or what is the challenge of a project manager here. And that has impacted me a lot. This is where you see the larger picture. It's not just writing some SQL script and being good at the ETL. There is a bigger game here. And while I was also a lead, I used to engage with the change management people. I used to engage with the other business stakeholders. I used to engage with finding owners for fixing data quality issues. I have invented ways where I can actually um, provide fortnightly updates and progress on data quality, and actually make business understand that I need somebody who raise their hand and say, okay, we are not going to make more data quality issues for you. So um, that made me realize that it's a business problem. It's not a technical problem. But yes, throughout this research, these 3 questions, and secondly, the case studies. When I dig deeper, I have 40 references in my book, and this particular case study, and there are many like this, by the way. When you see those numbers, right? And again, it's not just the data migration when this kind of a project failures occur. It's not just because of one issue. There are many issues. But um, coming across this cases that have gone south, I've also sort of expanded my universalism. Basically, it expanded my understanding of how how you can actually look at this problem as a business problem, and how I can communicate my finding to a project manager, being a data person.
Okay.
So that is something that was the key learning for me.
Okay, I'm going
So
to
now,
ask Lisa to unmute and ask the second question about Evergreen within the framework. Lisa, if you want to ask your question of Krupesh, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
I
yes,
see you,
yep.
yes.
Perfect. My second question was really to find out, now that you have this foundational framework and you had said those three components, is there one area that needs to stay evergreen so that, I guess, regardless of the tools or the systems as they evolve, and maybe this will help reveal what are some of the non-negotiables and the other foundational pillars?
Yes. Um, Compliance remains evergreen. Okay. You cannot break laws and regulations for data migration. So that's evergreen for sure. Um, Second thing is, like any project, you must have a good discovery stage and project planning stage where um, you actually know what you're doing, basically, right? So that's evergreen. And the third is, I've been fortunate to be a lead and create a plan, execute a data migration plan. But I was also part of those projects where there was no plan. I was involved when things have already gone south. And what I noticed that what I noticed that people are making decisions on ad hoc basis, which they would have you know with the plan approach. It is more informed decisions, and you're in sort of a control stage, whereas without any plan, you're making those same decisions that you make with the plan, but more ad hoc, and then you have the constraints of the budget, time, people. So that sort of leads to chaos. So there's fundamental foundation of any project delivery. It's evergreen. Okay. I hope
Cool.
I was able to answer this. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Okay.
Yes.
Tariq, I see you got your hand up. Do you want to ask your question, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Robert, for giving me this opportunity. And before I ask my question, I would like to congratulate Krupesh for release of the book on the data migration framework. Since I come from a technical background and I have done projects on data migration, and I joined in between in this session. So I would like to just know that uh, cutover planning used to be one of the challenging tasks when we used to do the data migration, especially for the ERP projects, where we used to migrate the data from legacy system into some ERP modules. So have you talked about cutover planning and challenges and best practices in this book? If you have already talked about this in this session before I joined, that is, I might have skipped that portion, but I just
Um,
wanted to hear on that.
Great question, actually. Yes, this is, you have assumed it right. As you can see here, the go live component in the migration on the top.
Yes, yes,
There's the component, and there's a chapter called Go Live that takes a deep dive into the cutover planning, and is the most critical step. So you can get
exactly.
everything
Yeah,
right, right? You can get
ex-
everything, your foundation right, your iteration right, even your testing
exactly.
strategy is okay. But if you don't have a right go live or the cutover plan,
Hmm.
and the run sheet that you have to run through certain steps on that,
Exactly. Each and
and
every
it
steps. Yeah.
yes, yes, and the book also talks about how you can actually, your data migration scope impacts your cutover as well. So
Yes.
more, the larger the data, the more amount of the data, the longer the cutover time, and the longer your business going to remain offline. So how are you going to actually deal with that? The book also addresses that,
Yes.
that you have to go back to
Yes.
the paper trail. Especially I work in the in healthcare sector. When
Hmm.
emergency department, I cannot tell patient to wait for a few hours because I'm updating
Exactly.
the
Time
ED
is the very
system,
big
right?
constraint
So
there.
yes, so
Yeah.
I've done migrations into
Mhm.
for businesses which are 24/7. So in the
Okay.
cutover planning, I have highlighted that, and I've also highlighted the green and the red flags, basically go no go calls. So when you create a
Yes.
cutover plan, what is your rollback
Understand, yeah.
strategy from point of
Yes.
what point you cannot roll back. And I think I like to highlight this particular section here in the scope. So you see this set of questions. Similarly, in that cutover, after explaining everything,
Mhm.
in this book, I have ended every chapter with these questions for my reader to actually go back and figure out these answers for their project. Right. So in the cutover as well, I have set of questions that deal with this different scenarios and planning the whole cutover and make my reader think that how he going to plan the whole cutover as well.
Great.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Yeah.
Yes,
No worries.
thank you.
Thank you.
It answers my question.
Krupesh, from Paul, he said he's busy with a data replication project where they're moving data from on-prem to Azure Lake, but that the on-prem data is stayed behind, but the copy is needed in the cloud. What he wants to know is, are there any similarities between data migration and data replication projects? And how can things that you got from data migration be applied to data replication projects?
Yes. Yeah, good. So as I said in my introduction, I was a software engineer for database replication product in my beginning of the career. So yes, there are some similarity. For example, getting the foundational right. How much data you're going to you're going to replicate? What is the volume of the data? What kind of compliances you need to be aware of? Who's going to do it? Through what technology you're going to move the data. So those foundational component would apply. But in terms of what is the core difference, the core difference is the data structure. When you are replicating or you're moving on-prem to cloud, you may be dumping everything as a CSV, or you just literally moving information in the same. You're not changing the structure as such. Whereas in the ERP data migration, when you are retiring a system and bringing in a new system, the target data structure is completely different. And in fact, because it's a recent system, modern system, it has lot of data quality checks and balances, data integrity checks and balances, a lot of sophistications which are not there on your system, which is running with a blue screen from last 30 years, right? So you will end up with situation where you have mandatory values or data points required in the target system, which is not part of the legacy system. And you have to create the business rules. You have to involve your business to actually take those informed decisions and own those decisions, that you are making some rules and modifying the data or generating certain type of data points on the fly during the data migration for your target system to work. And your target system cannot start without any data, right? It needs some data. So um, that's the core difference. You're not just moving data, you are moving the meaning behind the data, the structure behind the data. So that's the difference.
So are you talking about content and the context of that? Krupesh,
Yes.
one other question last, I think, from Michael, then we need to wrap it up because we're on the hour. Michael's saying, what are your recommendations for parallel runs versus a big bang approach? And what are the biggest issues you faced using Agile methodologies for data migration projects? And then finally, when would you prefer a waterfall approach?
Yes, good. There's so many questions in there. So big bang and phased approach. Yes. In the very first component here, data migration scope, I have explained and try to explain through using the risk analysis. So the book actually picks one particular option. Let's say you go big bang and you migrate everything. What are the risks behind that and how you can mitigate that? If you go with the phased approach, what are the potential risks with that? It also considers how many legacy system you have. Do you only have one instance or you have multiple instances of the same system across different sites? So with the big bang, first of all, never migrate everything. That's, you don't, even in the book, I say, do not avoid that lazy approach, because when you say just let's migrate everything in one go, there's the risk magnet for disaster. So when you're defining the scope, let's say even if you want to go big bang, you're going to take certain amount of the data with you, be it last 3 years, last 7 years, last 10 years, and data archival policies on and your data retention regulations sort of dictate that. So you have to involve your risk and legal teams in making those decisions. So with the Big Bang, one everything in one go, and that is last 3 years or 4 years, that's a good way to do, and it is achievable. Depending on you have the change management capacity to make your entire staff and everybody on board from the day one. So let's say you have to train thousands of people, and if you can do that, then you can do the Big Bang, and you can have a 4 hours or 8 hours of cutover window, or let's say a day or two, but you can do a Big Bang, and then next day everybody comes in and they are trained to continue the business as usual, or you have good support to actually make sure that the business operation continues. With the phased approach, it's a very low risk approach. There's no doubt in that, because you can learn from one phase to another and you can improve. But what it's going to do is you have to thought through, and there's also explained in the book that it's going to affect how you define your data migration scope. So let's say you're migrating last 3 years of data, and that you have multiple phased approach to it for next 2 years. The data migration scope for the first phase would be different from the second and the third. Secondly, you're going to run two systems in parallel. Some of the sites are on the old system, some sites on the new system. How are you going to reconcile that at your data warehouse and your reporting layer, right? What it means to run two systems in sequence. What about the integrations, right? The both system can be feeding some downstream data integrations. So with the phased approach, the change is manageable, but then there are this other data management dependencies that you need to thought through. And the book literally take this 4 to 5 different scenarios of Big Bang and phased and explain different risks associated with that. So which can be helpful in your data migration.
Okay, the other half of that question was, what are the biggest issues you faced using Agile methodologies for data migration? And I think we'll wrap it after that.
Yes, I did not choose Agile methodology. It was enforced on me, right? So I was a data migration lead, and data migration lead does not decide the vendors and the vendors' methods, right? So I was in my first project, I was in a situation where the target system, there's a fortnightly sprint. It was 2014, so Agile and everything was at its peak as the golden key for every problem. So yes, it was enforced on me, but as I highlighted, it was painful initially. But when I created this method and start tracking everything, it took me like nice 1, 2, or 3 days to prepare first few templates. But once I was in full swing, and every 15 days I have the new structure, I have those methods that I can quickly run through those changes in the structure and change my flags. And every fortnight, my progress was changing. It was not always increasing. I'm done with the 10 templates or the target templates, and now after the next Agile, I have 6 more templates of data upload templates introduced. So suddenly, my number of tables and number of fields to 0 flag increase. So I'm now from 75, I'm suddenly at 45. But what happened eventually toward the last quarter, when it matters the most, when we are now talking about the cutover here, and things were quite stable on the target side, I was then able to literally pinpoint that this field is not done because I'm waiting for the data quality rule, or this field is not done because the mapping of the value set is not yet approved. So that way, as I said, I was able to keep my mind sane and actually keep my business and stakeholders informed. Coming back to waterfall, I think it's if the implementation of the ERP system is waterfall based, then there might be a different approach to this. You would have only unknown source and a stable target. Maybe you don't have to every 15-day change things. But unfortunately I'm yet to cross my path with that kind of a project. Always been into this agile and then sprint cycles.
Oh, Krupesh, thank you very, very much for the insights. I think there's been some good interaction. I know you said that you would prefer that I identify somebody to get a copy of your book. The person that would like to nominate would be Melissa. She's the one who helped us get the questions rolling. But for the rest of you, some great questions from all around the world. My mates like Michael and Adam and others that we've joined in all of our sessions, guys. Thank you for coming along. And Krupesh, enjoy Melbourne, enjoy the street food, and we look forward to chatting to you again at some point in the future. Thank you very, very much.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks a lot for attending this and asking really good questions. And I would welcome your feedback and reviews and connections on LinkedIn. So, and I hope my road will cross again with most of you. Thank you. Thanks a
Yeah,
lot.
we'll see you here in South Africa at some point in the future.